The underground bar hummed with a deceptive cheerfulness, a strange juxtaposition to the city's suffocating dystopia outside. Neon lights flickered, casting lurid glows across cracked walls, and patrons with faces either too familiar or too distinctly altered to be real. Zane Grayson sat hunched at the counter, idly spinning a neon cocktail in his hand, trying to appear like just another washed-up regular drowning his regrets. In reality, he wasn't a regular, and he didn't have regrets, not really. What he had was a dangerous secret. Another round? The bartender asked, an eyebrow raised. Sure, why not, Zane said with a grin, sliding the empty glass forward. His fingers brushed the rim, and for a second, his hand shimmered, the skin shifting into a strange crystalline texture before snapping back. He winced and shoved his hands into his pockets. No need to let anyone see that trick. Not yet, anyway. Neat trick, said a sultry voice beside him. Zane turned and found himself face to face with a stunning brunette, her smile all charm and danger. She wore a tight leather jacket that gleamed under the neon glow and boots that looked more suited for combat than casual strolls. Her eyes, however, were what made Zane pause, sharp, probing, like they could see through to the very marrow of his being. Thanks? Zane said cautiously, leaning back ever so slightly. Not sure what you mean. She tilted her head. Oh, come on. I saw it. Little shimmer there. Not many can pull off something that slick in public. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. What are you hiding, huh? Zane laughed, a bit too loudly, and raised his hands in mock surrender. Hey, lady, I'm just a guy trying to enjoy a drink. Maybe you've had one too many? She smirked, unimpressed. Zane Grayson, she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. Zane froze. His grin faltered, replaced by a look of pure irritation. Ah, great. Another bounty hunter. Can't you people take a night off? The woman chuckled. Not a bounty hunter. Call me an admirer. And I'm here with friends. Before Zane could respond, the doors to the bar burst open, and 4 burly figures in tactical gear stormed in. Their presence sucked the air out of the room, and patrons scrambled to the edges, eager to avoid whatever storm was about to break. Zane cursed under his breath. You've got to be kidding me, he muttered. The brunette smirked. I'd run if I were you. Yeah. Thanks for the tip. Zane spun off his stool, knocking it into one of the goons as he bolted for the back exit. The goon snarled, shoving the stool aside, but Zane was already halfway across the room, weaving through tables with the kind of agility that came from years of staying one step ahead. Behind him, chaos erupted. The goons shoved aside patrons, overturning tables and chairs as they pursued him. A genetically enhanced dog, a hulking beast with glowing eyes and razor-sharp teeth, darted ahead, barking ferociously. Oh, you've got to be kidding me, Zane groaned. He burst through the back door into a narrow alley, the cold air biting against his skin. Without breaking stride, he focused, his body rippling as his features shifted. His limbs grew leaner, his face narrower. By the time he reached the end of the alley, he no longer looked like himself. Instead, he resembled a grizzled old man with a stooped posture and a limp. The dog, however, wasn't fooled. It charged straight for him, teeth bared. Damn it. Zane hissed, barely dodging as the beast lunged. He ducked into a side street, frantically searching for an out. His options were limited, and the pounding footsteps behind him reminded him he didn't have much time. Desperate, Zane skidded to a halt and focused again. This time, his body shifted further, his skin rippling as fur sprouted along his arms. His hands became paws, his nose elongated, and in seconds, he had transformed into a scruffy-looking mutt. The dog stopped short, growling in confusion as it sniffed the air. Zane barked, wagging his tail innocently. The mercenary team rounded the corner, their leader gesturing to the dog. Find him, the man barked. The dog hesitated, sniffing at Zane again before letting out a frustrated whine. Useless mutt, the leader muttered, motioning for the team to spread out. They vanished into the labyrinth of alleyways, leaving Zane alone with the confused canine. He let out a low growl of his own, just for good measure, before trotting away, his tail between his legs. Zane waited until he was several blocks away before shifting back to his original form. The transformation left him breathless, his muscles aching from the strain. He ducked into an abandoned warehouse, collapsing onto a dusty crate. Well, that was fun, he muttered, rubbing his temples. His mind raced. He had always known the evolution black market would catch up to him eventually. His ability to mimic others on a genetic level made him a prime target for their twisted experiments. They wanted his DNA, and they wouldn't stop until they got it, but this was too close. If he didn't come up with a plan, and soon, he'd end up as just another lab rat in their collection. As if on cue, his wristband beeped, projecting a holographic screen into the air. Ivy Calder's face appeared, her expression as sharp as ever. "You look terrible," she said without preamble. "Nice to see you too, Ivy," Zane said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I heard about the ambush." "They're escalating, Zane. Lucius Kane isn't playing games anymore." "Yeah, no kidding," Zane said, leaning back against the wall. "Got any bright ideas, or are you just here to gloat?" Ivy rolled her eyes. "Meet me at the usual spot. We need to talk." Before Zane could respond, the hologram winked out, leaving him alone in the dark. He sighed. "Great. Because my day wasn't exciting enough already." The usual spot was a crumbling diner on the edge of the city, a relic from a time when people actually cared about things like charm and community. Now it was just another husk, a place where desperate people made desperate deals. Zane slipped inside, scanning the room before sliding into a booth across from Ivy. She looked the same as always, sharp, focused, and vaguely annoyed. "You're late," she said. "Yeah, well, I had a dog problem." Ivy raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Instead, she slid a data pad across the table. "This is what we're up against." Zane glanced at the screen. His face, and a hefty bounty, stared back at him. "Lucius has doubled his efforts. He's sending more than just mercenaries this time. He's got scientists, bounty hunters, and God knows what else. They're scouring the city for you." "Fantastic," Zane said, tossing the pad aside. "So what's your plan?" "I need you to get into Lucius' private lab," Ivy said, her tone deadly serious. "He's got files there, data on every experiment they've ever run. If we can get it, we can take them down." Zane snorted. "And here I thought you were going to suggest something easy, like, I don't know, moving to a different planet." "Zane." Ivy's voice softened. "This is our chance. If we don't do this, it's only a matter of time before they catch you. And when they do, it won't just be you they destroy. They'll use your DNA to create monsters. Do you want that on your conscience?" Zane rubbed his temples, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "Fine," he said finally. "But you'd better have a damn good plan." Ivy's lips curled into a smirk. "Oh, don't worry. I always do." The diner hummed faintly with the buzz of a flickering light overhead as Zane leaned back against the cracked booth, studying Ivy. Her confident smirk grated on him, but he couldn't deny she had a knack for survival, and in his line of work, that meant something. "So, what's the grand strategy?" Zane asked, drumming his fingers on the table. "You want me to just waltz into Lucius' lab, ask politely for his top-secret files, and hope he doesn't kill me on the spot?" "Not quite," Ivy replied, sliding a sleek data chip toward him. "This contains a blueprint of Lucius' compound. The security is tight, but with your abilities, you've got options." Zane picked up the chip and twirled it between his fingers. "Options like walking straight into a death trap." Ivy sighed, leaning forward. "Listen, the lab is hidden beneath one of his manufacturing plants. The place is crawling with guards, but the good news is Lucius himself rarely shows up. That means the only people you'll have to deal with are his hired muscle and scientists." "Oh, only his army of loyal goons and brainiac henchmen. Piece of cake, Zane muttered, slipping the chip into his pocket. And what's my incentive, exactly? Other than staying alive, which, by the way, I'm already doing just fine without this little suicide mission. Ivy's smirk faded, replaced by a rare flicker of sincerity. Because if we don't stop him, it's not just you he'll come for. The black market is expanding. They're taking people off the streets, Zane. Kids. Families. They're building something far worse than anything we've seen. Her words settled over him like a cold weight. Zane looked away, his jaw tightening. He'd spent his life avoiding responsibility, slipping through cracks, never staying in one place long enough to care. But now, the stakes felt different. Personal, fine, he said, his voice quieter. But if this goes sideways, I'm blaming you. Deal, Ivy said, rising from the booth. Meet me at the rendezvous point tomorrow night. I'll get you inside. From there, you're on your own. Zane groaned. Of course I am. The next evening, Zane stood in the shadow of a massive industrial plant on the outskirts of the city. Smoke billowed from towering chimneys, the acrid stench of chemicals filling the air. Ivy crouched beside him, her black jumpsuit blending into the darkness. She handed him a small device, a palm-sized tablet with a glowing screen. This is your guide, she whispered. It'll show you the quickest route to the lab. Stay out of sight, and don't engage unless you have to. Got it, Zane muttered, slipping the tablet into his jacket. Any other pearls of wisdom? Yeah, Ivy said, her voice hardening. Don't get caught. With that, she slipped away into the shadows, leaving Zane alone. He took a deep breath, steeling himself, before focusing. His body shimmered, his features shifting until he resembled one of the guards he'd seen patrolling earlier. It wasn't a perfect disguise, mimicking DNA wasn't the same as becoming someone completely, but it would hold up under casual scrutiny. He approached the main gate, walking with the confidence of someone who belonged. The guards barely glanced at him as he passed, their attention fixed on their patrols. Zane smirked inwardly. So far, so good. Once inside, the tablet in his pocket vibrated, directing him toward a service elevator at the far end of the compound. He moved quickly but carefully, keeping to the shadows when he could. The plant's interior was a maze of machinery and pipes, the air thick with heat and the hum of industrial noise. As he neared the elevator, a voice barked behind him. Hey! You, what are you doing here? Zane turned, his heart pounding. A burly guard was approaching, his hand resting on the baton strapped to his belt. Just running an errand, Zane said, mimicking the gruff tone he imagined the guard he resembled would use. You know how it is. The man narrowed his eyes, stepping closer. I don't recognize you. What's your clearance code? Zane's mind raced. Clearance code? He hadn't prepared for that. As the guard reached for his comms, Zane acted on instinct. His hand shot out, his skin rippling as it morphed into a sharp, crystalline blade. The guard's eyes widened in shock as Zane jabbed him in the side, careful to avoid anything vital. The man crumpled to the ground with a grunt, unconscious but alive. Sorry, buddy, Zane muttered, dragging the guard's body behind a stack of crates. You're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He swiped the man's keycard and hurried to the elevator. The tablet buzzed again, showing a glowing path leading downward. Zane swiped the card and stepped inside, the doors closing with a metallic clang. The lab was a stark contrast to the gritty industrial plant above. The walls gleamed with sterile white light, the air cool and unnervingly still. Rows of stasis pods lined the main corridor, each one containing a person suspended in a shimmering liquid. Zane slowed, his stomach twisting as he studied the faces frozen behind the glass. Men, women, even children, all unconscious, their bodies hooked up to an array of wires and monitors. This is sick, he muttered under his breath, his fists clenching. The tablet buzzed again, guiding him to a door marked restricted access. Zane swiped the keycard, and the door hissed open. Inside, the lab was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of machinery. A terminal sat in the center of the room, its screen glowing with lines of code. Zane approached cautiously, his eyes scanning for traps or hidden cameras. He inserted the data chip Ivy had given him into the terminal and began downloading the files. As the progress bar inched forward, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. His instincts proved correct. The door behind him slammed shut, and a voice echoed through the room. Well, it drawled. I knew you'd come eventually. Zane spun around, his heart sinking as Lucius Kane stepped into the room. The black market leader was tall and imposing, his pale features a mask of calm menace. His piercing blue eyes seemed to strip Zane bare, and a small smile played at the corners of his lips. Lucius, Zane said, forcing a grin. Nice setup you've got here. A little creepy, but hey, who am I to judge? Lucius chuckled softly. You've caused me quite a bit of trouble, Zane. But I must admit, I admire your audacity. Thanks. I'll add that to my resume. Lucius' smile faded. You can't win this, you know. Your abilities are extraordinary, but they're wasted on you. With my resources, your DNA could change the world. Yeah, I'm gonna pass on being your lab rat, Zane said, edging toward the terminal. The download was nearly complete, but he needed more time. Lucius tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. You're clever, Zane. But not clever enough. Before Zane could react, Lucius raised a hand, and a pulse of energy rippled through the room. Pain exploded in Zane's head, and he staggered, his form flickering as his disguise faltered. Lucius' smile returned. Ah, there you are. Zane gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stand. You're right. I'm done hiding. With a burst of effort, he shifted his form again, his body rippling as he mimicked Lucius' features. The black market leader blinked in surprise, and Zane smirked. Let's see how your men like taking orders from two of you, he said, lunging forward. Zane lunged at Lucius, his newly shifted form a mirror image of the man. Lucius stepped back instinctively, his icy composure flickering as he took in the doppelganger before him. For a brief second, confusion darted across his face, just enough for Zane to exploit. With a quick twist, Zane grabbed the edge of a nearby console and flipped himself over it, landing crouched on the other side. The holographic display from the terminal continued to hum, the download bar nearly complete. His heart raced as he weighed his options: fight Lucius here, now, in a room surrounded by potentially lethal tech, or make a break for it and hope Ivy's chip had the firepower to expose everything. Lucius' voice rang out, calm but edged with menace. You're clever, Zane. I'll give you that. But duplicating me? A cheap trick, and one you'll regret. Zane grinned, his voice now a perfect mimic of Lucius. Cheap? I prefer efficient. And honestly, you should take it as a compliment. Lucius moved swiftly, pulling a sleek device from his pocket. It pulsed with a soft blue light as he activated it, and a wave of heat rippled through the room. Zane winced as his body shuddered, his form destabilizing under the invisible force. He cursed under his breath. Some kind of disruptor, designed to scramble the genetic mimicry he relied on so heavily. The edges of his borrowed face flickered, reverting to his true features for a split second before he forced them back into place. He couldn't hold it for long. Sweat beaded on his forehead as the effort to maintain the disguise drained him. Lucius sneered. Do you feel that? It's the pain of a pretender being stripped down to their core. You can't hide from me, Zane. No one can. Good thing I'm not hiding, Zane shot back, throwing himself into motion. He vaulted over another console, grabbing a small but heavy piece of equipment on his way. Without hesitation, he hurled it at Lucius, who deflected it easily with a flick of his wrist. The object crashed into the wall, sparks flying as the lab's delicate machinery groaned under the impact. The terminal beeped, and the download completed with a satisfying chime. Zane didn't wait. He lunged for the data chip, yanking it from the terminal and shoving it into his pocket. Lucius growled, the sound low and primal, and Zane could feel the shift in the air as the man advanced, a predator ready to pounce. You think you're walking out of here with that data? Lucius snarled. Foolish. Walking? Zane quipped, spinning on his heel and bolting toward the exit. Try running. The door hissed open as he approached, the hall beyond bathed in harsh white light. Alarms blared, and the rhythmic stomp of boots echoed in the distance. Lucius' men were on their way, and Zane knew he had seconds at best before they overwhelmed him. He darted left, his mind racing. The tablet Ivy had given him buzzed in his pocket, showing a flashing escape route. He cursed as he realized it led straight through the stasis pod chamber. As he burst into the room, the sight of the frozen captives stopped him in his tracks. Their faces, peaceful yet haunting, pressed against the inside of their pods. The youngest, a boy no older than 12, floated in his containment unit, wires snaking from his body like grotesque roots. Don't think about it, Zane muttered to himself. Focus. But he couldn't. His hand brushed the glass of the boy's pod, and something inside him snapped. He couldn't just leave them. Lucius' men were closing in, the alarms deafening now, but the thought of walking away from these prisoners gnawed at him. He scanned the consoles, his eyes locking on a red emergency release lever. This is either a really bad idea or a genius one, Zane said, grabbing the lever and yanking it hard. The pods shuddered and hissed as the liquid inside began to drain. One by one, the prisoners stirred, coughing and gasping as they were freed. Chaos erupted as the first few stumbled out, their legs weak and their eyes wild with confusion. Lucius appeared in the doorway, his expression a mix of fury and disbelief. What have you done? Just leveling the playing field, Zane called back, grabbing a fallen metal rod from the ground and swinging it into the nearest fire suppression system. Water gushed from overhead sprinklers, drenching the room and shorting out nearby machinery. Sparks flew, and Lucius cursed, stepping back to avoid the electrical surge. The freed prisoners turned, their eyes wide as they saw Lucius. A few of them, those who still had strength in their limbs, moved toward him, their desperation turning to rage. Lucius held up his disruptor, but Zane saw the flicker of hesitation in his movements. For all his power, Lucius hadn't planned for a room full of angry test subjects. Zane seized the opportunity. He sprinted toward the far exit, yelling over his shoulder. If you want to live, follow me. A handful of prisoners stumbled after him, their movements clumsy but determined. Behind them, Lucius roared, his voice echoing through the chaos. You think this ends here? You think you can escape me? I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth, Grayson. Zane didn't look back. He pushed forward, leading the ragged group through the maze of hallways. The tablet buzzed again, and he glanced down to see a path leading to a service tunnel. It was their only chance. The tunnel was cramped and damp, the air thick with the scent of oil and rust. Zane ushered the group inside, his mind racing. He could hear the distant shouts of Lucius' men, their pursuit relentless. Ivy, he muttered, tapping the communicator on his wrist. I hope you've got a way to get us out of here. Her voice crackled through the device. I've got a transport waiting at the south entrance. You've got 3 minutes, Zane. Don't be late. 3 minutes? Zane groaned, glancing back at the group behind him. No pressure. They emerged into the open air, the night sky a welcome sight after the sterile nightmare of the lab. Ivy's transport, a battered but functional hovercraft, hovered nearby, its engines whining. She stood at the open hatch, waving them in. Hurry up, she yelled, her voice cutting through the din. Zane ushered the last of the prisoners into the craft, his heart pounding. As he turned to climb aboard, he caught a glimpse of Lucius emerging from the tunnel, his face twisted with fury. You'll never be free of me, Zane. Lucius shouted, His voice rising over the roar of the hovercraft's engines, Zane smirked, flipping him a casual salute. "We'll see about that." He leapt into the craft, and Ivy slammed the hatch shut. The hovercraft rose into the air, its engines roaring as it sped away. Zane collapsed onto a seat, his body aching and his mind spinning. The data chip burned in his pocket, a reminder of everything they'd risked, and Ivy sat across from him, her expression unreadable. "You did it," she said quietly. "Yeah," Zane replied, leaning his head back and closing his eyes. "For now." The hovercraft soared into the night, leaving the chaos of the black market behind. But Zane knew this was just the beginning. Lucius wouldn't stop, not until he'd reclaimed what he thought was his. And Zane? He wasn't about to let that happen.